This is a podcast by WellHouse Church, where we talk about what it's like to be a Christian Monday through Saturday, to live as a person of faith in a culture against faith.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome again to Let's Talk. I am with the man, the myth, the legend,
Oh, yes.
Adam Chaney, once again.
What's up? Happy to be here.
How you doing, bro?
Doing great.
Good.
Lots of recording.
Yeah.
Enjoying this.
Lots of recording. When I get guests out for content days, I got to maximize the time.
Oof. At least he's feeding me. Let's go.
Yeah. So today we are going to talk about social justice. So,
right.
Adam, you're the development director at Elijah Rising, which is a social justice organization,
Yes.
specifically in the vein of human and sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
But social justice is a much larger umbrella of which human trafficking and sex trafficking fit under.
Right.
So let's talk big social justice. It's like, what is it, and should the church even care?
Ooh, should the church even care? Okay, what is it? So social, right? Meaning society, right? So population, a bunch of people crammed together in a area, make up a society. And we talk about that nationally, state, local, right? You have different societies. And then justice, right? So we were kind of talking about this before we began. I mean, I think a good working definition, if that's the right way to put it, is like establishing equality for all people, or maybe restoring the equality of all people. But for some marginalized people groups, they've never had equality. They've never actually experienced justice, and there is the need to establish it. But for some people, it's to reclaim a place in society that's equitable, that's empowering. At Elijah Rising, we use the word empowering a lot because one of the things that we do is we empower women. I mean, and specifically in our work, it's women who are, going through the restoration process after experiencing commercial sexual exploitation. So that's kind of how I think of social justice. I kind of think about it also at like a more macro level as well. Like I think about it globally. I think about social justice as a global issue. But the truth be told, it starts locally with the way that each and every one of us uses our influence, our power, because everybody has some measure of power, our economics, how we choose to spend our money, and how we choose to make our money. And then just relationally, like how we treat our neighbor. So your second question there was, should the church care? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
It's a softball question.
Somebody walks up to Jesus, right? So I don't know how familiar the viewers and listeners are with the biblical narrative, but like this guy walks up to Jesus one day and says, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? He's a Jew, and so he's very familiar with the commandments. This is kind of a cornering question. And Jesus goes, it's a setup. Jesus quotes some Old Testament, and he says, love God. But then he says, but wait, there's more. Love your neighbor as yourself. So in the same breath, Jesus says it's not only important to love God, but it's important to love your neighbor. Yeah. So if you're social justice, in my opinion, is loving your neighbor. Yeah. And that plays out in a myriad of ways in a multitude of issues.
Yeah. So for me on the pastor side, I've defined social justice in a spiritual way as the activity of the believer being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yeah, right.
Because Jesus says, whatever you've done to the least of these, the marginalized, the vulnerable, the people lacking equity in society,
you've done to me.
You've done to me. So it is this, well, and then even further, when Paul is persecuting the church and Jesus appears to him in Acts 8, Jesus' question is, why do you persecute me?
That's good.
And so it really is that the Imago Dei, the image of God, is embedded in humans, in people, not just people of faith. I think that's a misconception. And so I asked the question, should the church care? Because I think at large, the church doesn't.
Unfortunately, I don't know, man. At large, I think there's something to be said for the evolution of the church since the first century.
That's fair. That's fair.
And I think there have been times and spaces and geographies, locations and cultures where the church has cared deeply. I think in more recent times, I think about the liberation theology movement of South America, which is very social justice oriented.
Yeah.
I'm thinking Gustavo Gutierrez and many others. We could list them. At times, hospitals were originally created by the church, by orphanages. There are many, many movements that saw the least of these, the marginalized, the oppressed within the church throughout history and said, well, we got to do something about that right now in a very practical way. It's that orthodoxy to orthopraxy.
Right.
So maybe if I could critique your statement just a little bit, I would say perhaps the current iteration of the American evangelical church seems to not care a whole lot.
Yeah,
with the exception of maybe a couple of justice issues, which we may or may not want to get into.
Yeah. So I think absolutely Jesus, especially like looking at places like the Sermon on the Mount, the parables in Luke's gospel, Jesus is very concerned about how people of faith act towards other people, just in general. So social justice is a key issue. It is something that WellHouse cares about. It's one of the reasons you're out here today.
Very thankful for that.
And so we want to know, like, just as in general, help us formulate what are some social justice issues that we think are charges to the church that we should care about and evaluate in light of our Christian faith.
Yeah, so I can really only speak to ones that are, I think I should perhaps say I'm really only comfortable speaking to ones that are important to me.
Okay, that's fine.
And they're important to me, though, just to clarify, they're important to me because of Jesus.
Yeah, right,
right. I care about these issues because of who Jesus is revealed to me as. And so I think the first one for me, obviously,
human trafficking.
My day job, right? My whole existence really is built around fighting for those who are being exploited in the commercial sexual exploitation industry, which I know we're going to do another episode on that.
We're going to do an episode dedicated.
So I won't do a deep dive, but real quick on that, one of the reasons why it's such an important issue to me is there's this term intersectionality. Okay. When it comes to social justice movements, intersectionality is this idea that there are multiple injustices, there's multiple issues of oppression, marginalization, systemic oppression issues that intersect. So
macro oppression.
Yeah. So like I'm a 33-year-old white male in America. Cisgendered male in America. My experience with injustice is radically different than a transgender black woman who grew up in poverty, right? And so what that individual is experiencing is a lot of intersections of justice issues, social justice issues. So intersectionality, just to drop a big term. So here, let me get back to the sex trafficking issue. Sex trafficking is the intersection of many social justice issues. It is homelessness. It is poverty. It is addiction. It is food scarcity. It is obviously, sexual exploitation. It's poverty. It's racism. It's incarceration. It's sex trafficking kind of, you will find all of these social justice issues existing as vulnerabilities that lead somebody to the point to where they are exploited by someone. That's why I care about the issue a lot.
Yeah.
Among other reasons. Some of the other big ones for me personally, I think refugees, the care for refugees. I think immigration is a really big issue for me. I know you guys did a great podcast. I forget which one it was. They're blurring together in my head at the moment. But we
put out a lot of content.
You and Clayton talked for a while about immigration in terms of politics. And things like that.
That was on the episode of Can You Be a Christian and Democrat?
Right. And so that's a really big one to me because of the biblical witness, because of who Jesus is. Jesus at one point in his life was a refugee. And there are multiple places in the scriptures where we're told to
care for the immigrant,
make a refugee as one of your own citizens. And so immigration is a big issue for me, especially when it comes to child refugees, like underage refugees and immigrants. DACA, I mean, not to get too political here, but like DACA is a really huge issue for me personally, which is Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, what the acronym stands for. And again, we can get into more details.
And specifically, as that relates, the problem is they're separating parents and children at the borders.
Well,
and then after the separation and they go through the process, then they can't find the parents to reunite the family.
Well, that's the way it's playing out in recent days. The DACA was originally written to protect children who were brought here by their parents illegally, and they've grown up in this country. They've been educated here. They've got jobs here. They're living the American life here. And I have a number of personal friends who are protected by DACA or are at risk of DACA being taken away. So I have some personal anecdotal, connections with that issue in particular. Another one I think is mass incarceration, criminal justice issues. I have good friends that are working in this area who multiple times throughout the scriptures we see. Well, I'm thinking, I guess, more so in the New Testament, right? Like, where did the church get the idea of prison ministry, right? The apostles are locked up multiple times, right? And so even Paul and Silas, they're like ministering to the guards and the other prisoners. And so in this country, though, we have a mass incarceration issue. I think that's a bipartisan issue. I don't think that's a Democrat or Republican issue. I mean,
per capita, we have the largest incarceration rate of any country in the world.
Which has a lot to do with economics. I mean, it has a lot to do with the privatized jail system, the privatized prison systems. And so there's money to be made on incarcerating individuals, which is a justice issue. That's ridiculous. And so, and obviously black and brown people are far more impacted by the criminal justice system and the war on drugs and redlining. So then that leads me to another one. A huge social justice issue that the church has to care about is racism. Racism. This is 2020. This is November 2020. If you're not aware that this country has a systemic race issue, what rock are you living under? Or like switch up your media narrative. Because it's real, it's present. And here's why the church should care about it, because in Jesus's literal bloodline, we see a mixing of races. He really is all nations and all peoples. If you read the biblical narrative of how Jesus's family comes to be, there's Moabites in his bloodline. Okay.
And go just read Matthew 1 and look up those people.
Go. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And so
actually, by the time this comes out, I may have already preached a sermon on that.
There you go. How convenient. Like racism to me is anti-Christ. Like, to be racist is to be anti-Christ. It is to be literally anti-Jesus. And just to be clear, one more statement I'll make here, like about racism, is there's a difference between being anti-racism and not being racist. I think it's very important to recognize that, like, just not being racist is a good starting point, but that is different from being someone who is anti-racism.
Being active in the fight against racism.
Intentionally changing your language and challenging family members at the Thanksgiving table when they say something stupid and racist, right? That's being anti-racist. Teaching your children what racism is, including conversations about Black Wall Street, which we didn't learn about in our education. It's only recently come to light because black men are being killed, right? I mean, so being anti-racist is something different than I'm not a racist. Great, you're not a racist. I believe you. Perfect. Now be anti-racist. Take the next step, because I think that is incumbent upon the church. And one of the most segregated times in our country still to this day is when? Sunday mornings. We don't even worship together. And if we want to live into a realized eschatology, what does the eternal kingdom look like? Well, all tribes, all tongues, all nations, all people worshiping around the same throne.
So that one's hard for me. because there wouldn't be a black church if the white church would have let black people in.
Oh, we intentionally created the segregation.
Yeah. So for me, I'm like, guys, you do whatever you want, and I'll support you however you want to do it.
Without a doubt.
Because your existence is because we were terrible to you.
Well, and we're still terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, right. And there are cultural divides. Like I'm not in any way suggesting that like, if you go to an all black church, you need to go to a white church, or if you go to an all white church, you need to go to a black church or whatever, or like forced integration is also problematic. Right. Especially when it comes to religious gatherings, like go worship wherever. Yeah. It's just evidence of a systemic issue that is generationally rooted and has a lot of ways that it is playing out in our current culture and time. I think women's rights.
Yeah, so that's.
You want me to keep going? I can list.
Yeah. So that's one that I think if there were a personal charge to me for social justice issues, it's the one that's specifically touch and impact women.
Yeah.
In studying history, there's been a lot of like liberation movements. Yeah. That have happened both socially and theologically. We've seen liberation theology hit black men.
Yeah.
We've seen liberation theology hit Latinx communities.
Yeah.
We've seen liberation theology hit women, feminism.
Yeah.
The most underserved and undervoiced women are black women.
Absolutely.
Liberation theology in the black church missed black women.
Yeah.
Because they were oppressed by black men as well as other people.
Yeah.
Feminism missed black women because it was white women who took the horn.
Sure. In America.
In America.
These are very American. Yeah. Speaking as Americans on an American podcast is a very American-centric conversation.
The intersection of American Christianity and American culture. Yeah. So for me, the women one is a big one. And that plays itself out in a number of different ways. I talked about this on Pints and Perspectives, and we talked about it just not long ago. But people in positions of power have to fight to maintain that power.
Right.
And historically, men have been in power, and so they have done a very good job of keeping women pushed down, even in the church.
Oh, especially in the church.
This plays itself out in a number of different ways, but we go to two proof texts, one in 1 Timothy and one in 1 Corinthians.
Yep. We totally take them out of their context.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pastor, preach on.
Yeah, so we take them out of their context. We use them as proof text to say women don't have a right to be here, and yet we forsake the narrative at play of how God used women in these places and to do these things and the work of the Holy Spirit in women. And so women and gender equality issues are important to me. That's why, sex trafficking is a big issue because that's predominantly women.
Absolutely.
So I do think that's a big one. And
can I say one thing about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like in all of these issues, like the first step in oppressing a people group, or I'll say it this way: step one of marginalization and oppression is always making a demographic voiceless.
Yeah, removing the capacity for voice and input from a people group.
Unfortunately, historically, that has been the church with women. Yeah. You cannot speak.
Yeah.
To those two passages you're referring to. If you can speak, but only to the other women.
Or the kids.
To our children. Never in a pulpit. Now, that's not all, these are blanket statements. That's not all churches. It's not all Christianity throughout time. Yeah. In fact, the first century church, we know that there were women deacons.
It's just rampant with women when you actually read the narrative.
Absolutely. Go look up Phoebe if you don't believe me.
Phoebe, Chloe, Eutyche,
Lydia,
or Syntyche.
All of them. Yeah. And he'll read the Greek to you. He'll prove it.
Just so many.
The voicelessness, though, when you can remove the voice of a people, that is step one in taking their power away.
Yeah.
So anyways, I cut you off a second ago.
So that's one thing. we don't publish who our board members are at WellHouse for a number of different reasons. But with that, one of the things that we do is we make sure to have an equal number of women to men.
Yeah.
Because I think that is important.
Yeah.
And so women issues is a big one for me. I think because of the way that it touches women is the mass incarceration issue and the racism issue. I mean, you want to talk about oppressing women. If you take their primary breadwinner away and lengthen their prison sentence, double or triple what another similar thing. So the war on drugs is the big one where we see this, right? So if you don't know, the war on drugs, the basic premise here is that crack cocaine, which was prominent in minority communities, had double the sentence, the prison sentence, as powder cocaine, which is prominent among white people, and it's the same drug. Right. It is literally the same drug. One's cheaper.
Absolutely.
And one's more expensive and prominent amongst white people or people of power. Yeah. And so the sentence is less for those, but they're the same drug. And so,
well, even the bail system and the disenfranchisement, if you know, of your voting rights, right? I mean, and anyways, we could talk more about that. But one of the things that needs to happen in criminal justice reform is the re-enfranchisement of voting rights to those felons, which Florida, you know, voted to approve that, but then there was a poll tax placed on them that they had to pay off all their bail and fines before they were able to actually get those voting rights back. And these people were in prison, so they can't get a job now because they have a felony on their record. And so now they can't pay that money back. And yes, they are still disenfranchised.
Yeah. So that, I mean, and that's just a continuation of like Jim Crow laws.
Oh, without a doubt.
So I do think there are issues there. And so all that to say, coming back to the biblical side of this, should we care? Well, absolutely. I think I'm very vocal about this. I don't read Genesis 1, 2, and 3 super literally. I think they are a literary device to help explain God's activity in creation, but not to detail step by step what creation was. But in that, we have in Genesis chapter 1 that God made them, male and female, in his image and likeness. Yeah. There's something about the human that's different. They're made in the image of God, which is not talked about any other creature. Yeah. This is unique to the human.
Sure.
And so, and this is one of my complaints with a lot of the narrative that's been dominated for pro-life issues. All of these that we've just spoken about are pro-life issues. Being anti-abortion is not all-encompassing of pro-life. It is a pro-life issue, but it's not the only one.
Yeah.
Healthcare is a pro-life issue. Being fed is a pro-life issue. Mass incarceration, poverty, all of these are pro-life issues. And so if we believe that humans are made in the image of likeness of God, then absolutely we should care.
Yeah, and I think the abortion question, right, that's like the hottest topic, the hottest button to press, especially when we're talking about the church.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think what's missed in that conversation is like, it's so politicized.
Yeah, the narrative's been stripped from the church.
Well, there's just this like, well, if you vote this way, then you're for killing babies. Nobody's for killing babies, right? I mean, there are people.
That's such a straw man argument.
Yeah, like, sure, there are people out there that want to kill babies, but like not 72 million people want to kill babies. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's not, it's a straw man argument. It's talking past one another. I don't want abortions to happen either.
Right.
Right. I mean, I don't support abortion in all of its forms at all terms of pregnancy. I don't think that's good for our country. I don't think it's good for our communities. I don't think it's good for the mother. But here's the deal. If we are impoverishing individuals, if we're locking up the fathers over petty issues, and then, keeping them locked up forever because they don't have the economic means to get out, or the social structures to support them when they get out.
And then constantly trying to take away the welfare that assists them.
Yeah. Stripping healthcare away from them, right? Not making healthcare accessible, affordable, and quality. We're not feeding. They don't have access to adequate nourishment and food. There's food deserts. We're just outside of Houston, Texas. I can drive 5 minutes from my house to a different neighborhood and get into a predominantly black neighborhood, rather famous neighborhood, and they don't have a grocery store.
Yeah,
where you can buy produce, right? And so you have all of these social justice issues that are stacking upon one another. This is back to the term intersectionality. And then what we want to do is say, but abortion bad. Well, but put yourself in the shoes of the 19-year-old mother
that can barely feed herself,
who can't feed herself, maybe. And what decision are you asking? Well, then they should put the baby up for adoption. Sure, but how? If she doesn't have if she doesn't have insurance, if she doesn't have access to quality, plus black women die in childbirth at a much higher rate than any other demographic.
Well, and I think even beyond that, that's my fault with the narrative around the church and the abortion conversation is, well, adoption's the answer. Well, in 2017, there were over 400,000 children in the foster system. There were 350,000 evangelical churches.
Yeah, go preach.
If one family from every evangelical church, that doesn't include Catholic churches, that doesn't include mainline Protestants, that doesn't include the Orthodox.
Yeah.
If one family from every church would have adopted one kid, we could have wiped out the foster system.
Yeah, man.
You can't continue to say that adoption is the answer if you refuse to adopt kids.
Yeah, I mean, adoption is the answer, right? Sure, I want all the babies born.
Yeah, me too.
I want all the babies in loving homes that are supporting them and giving them the best chance at a future.
But the church has to step up.
Dude, I have a friend, Joe Madison. He runs another anti-trafficking organization that primarily focuses on reducing demand. So he works with a lot of dudes, a lot of buyers.
So the Johns.
And one of the things he says about the fight to end trafficking and reducing demand is that the sleeping giant in this work is the church. It's the church. We're already organized. We already have leadership structures. We have a ton of money and resources and buildings and influence. The evangelical church is obviously, after most recent events, a huge legislative voting bloc.
Yep.
You want to end abortion? Adoption is the answer. Access to affordable, adequate healthcare is also the answer.
Yeah.
Access to food is the answer. There are many, many issues. You increase social services and social structures to offer justice to marginalized populations, I guarantee abortions are reduced.
Yep. So all of this to say, social justice is not one issue.
No.
Social justice is a category in which marginalized people are affected by any number of concerns that which the church should care about.
Yeah, because we're called to love our neighbor.
Yes. And so my charge to you, we're about to get into the next episode where we talk specifically about human trafficking because that is a huge Houston issue.
Yeah, for sure.
But for you, any of the number of issues that we've talked about, you can reach out to me. I'll link some in the show notes here, but you personally can go and support some of these other initiatives that you feel called to, because we at WellHouse, we can't meet all of them.
Yeah, no.
We're going to pick one or two that we get really involved in and we try to make a deep impact in, but we want our people involved in every one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the reasons that we've modeled our church this way is because I don't want to give you service opportunities. I want the Lord to raise up in you the things that you're passionate about and what he's doing, and you make space to go do those in the name of WellHouse Church with organizations that already exist. So reach out to me. I'll put some in the show notes if you have any questions. But deeply, deeply, deeply know to your core that social justice is an issue that's been politicized and the narrative has been taken from the church, but it is first and foremost an issue of the church.
Yeah. Amen.